I woke up to a strange noise in the night. It was him, my stepfather, Michael. But what happened next, I could never have predicted. He came toward me, his breathing heavy, and I felt his hands reach for me. I knew I shouldn't let that happen, but something in his gaze made me forget all inhibitions. And in that moment, we crossed a line from which there would be no going back. You won't believe what happened next. I never thought I'd find myself back here, not after everything that happened. I left my hometown at 18, eager to start fresh in the city, away from the endless whispers of my parents' divorce and the heartbreak that followed. I had promised myself that I would move on and never look back. College, my own life, my career, all of it felt so far away from the mess that had been my home. But then I got the call. Mom had been in an accident. It wasn't life-threatening, but she needed surgery, and I knew, without a doubt, that I had to come back and be there for her. She needed me, and I was her daughter. I couldn't abandon her, not when she was vulnerable. Even after all these years, even after the cold distance that had grown between us, I couldn't ignore that pull. When I arrived, the house looked the same. The worn front porch, the familiar swing on the porch, everything was just like I remembered. Except nothing felt the same. I felt like a stranger walking through the door. The house was quieter, colder, and the most glaring change wasn't in the furniture or the decor, it was in the people who lived there now. "Hey, Soph, come on in," Mom greeted me weakly from the couch, her face pale, but her eyes still warm. She smiled, but there was something distant about her smile, something that didn't reach her eyes. She was trying to act fine, but I could tell she wasn't. "I'm glad you're here," she added softly, her voice weak. "I'll be all right, but it's been so hard without you around." I forced a smile, trying to act as though everything was normal. I moved towards her, hugging her carefully, but I felt the strange gap between us, the distance that had grown in the years since I left. And then, I saw him. Michael, my mom's new husband. He stood there awkwardly, trying to be polite, but I could tell he didn't know how to act around me. "Hey, Sophie," he said, smiling a little too widely. I didn't return the smile. I never had accepted him, and now, after everything, it felt like a weight I couldn't shake. Michael was always nice, always trying to make small talk, but I had never really accepted him as part of my life. He was just there, a stranger who now lived in my home, in my father's place. That's how I saw him, and nothing could change that. I looked at my mom, and she smiled at me like everything was fine. But I couldn't ignore the tension in the air. The house, though the same on the outside, felt entirely different. It was like they had moved on without me, and I was an outsider coming back, expecting to pick up where we left off. But we had never really left off. We had just drifted apart. "So, how's everything at work?" Michael asked, pulling out a chair and sitting down at the kitchen table as if this was just a normal visit. His voice was kind. Too kind for someone I barely knew. He wanted to make me feel comfortable, but I couldn't. I was too much of a stranger in my own home now. I shrugged, not sure how to answer. "Work's fine. Busy, you know," I said, forcing the words out, trying to keep the conversation light. "Just got back to visit for Mom, I guess." "Yeah, I'm glad you're here," he said, glancing over at Margaret. He was trying so hard to make everything normal. It made me uncomfortable. How could everything be normal when it wasn't? When my mother had moved on so quickly, when everything was different, and when I didn't feel like I belonged anymore. Dinner was awkward, filled with forced small talk, like we were all strangers trying to act like family. Michael kept asking about my plans, my life, my future, like we were friends. But we weren't. He wasn't part of my life, and I wasn't part of his. My mom had moved on, and in a way, I was stuck in the past, still holding on to the pieces of what used to be. After dinner, I retreated to my old room. The room that hadn't really changed much except for the layers of dust that had accumulated in my absence. The bed still felt like it did when I was younger, and I found myself lying there, staring at the ceiling, feeling lost. I had no idea where I fit into this new life. I didn't belong here anymore, and the realization hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just Michael. It was the way my mother had rebuilt her life so quickly after the divorce. It was the way she seemed so comfortable in her new life with him, as if nothing had ever happened. As if the pain of losing my father had faded with time. I had tried to push that pain aside, to focus on my own life, but it was hard to forget that nothing felt the same anymore. I wasn't a part of this new family, and I couldn't bring myself to accept it. I knew I had to be there for Mom, but it felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying not to disrupt the fragile balance they had created. I didn't want to rock the boat, but I didn't know how to fit into a world where I no longer had a place. The first few days at home were filled with awkward silences and strained conversations. My mom had recovered from her surgery well enough, but it was clear that she was still adjusting. Her new life with Michael felt like a puzzle I couldn't quite fit into. I hadn't expected everything to be perfect when I came back, but I hadn't anticipated how hard it would be to reconnect with her. I thought the absence of my dad would be the hardest thing to face, but it was the distance between us that felt like a weight on my chest. Each day was spent in an uncomfortable routine. Michael tried his best to engage with me, asking about my studies, my life in the city, and how I was adjusting to being back home. But there was something off about the way he spoke, the way he acted like he had known me for years when I barely knew anything about him. His questions felt too probing, too personal, and I couldn't help but feel he was trying too hard. But that was just Michael. He was always the friendly, approachable type, and despite my efforts to remain distant, I could see why my mom had fallen for him. He was nice, considerate, and in his own way, genuinely trying to make me feel welcome. But it felt unnatural. It felt forced, like he was playing a role I couldn't see him in. I wasn't the only one who seemed to be struggling. My mom and I barely spoke about anything of substance, and when we did, the words felt hollow, as if there was something we both wanted to say but couldn't. The conversation about her surgery had barely scratched the surface of what we needed to talk about, and every time I tried to bring it up, she would shift the topic to something safer, something that wouldn't upset the new balance she had carefully built with Michael. There was a quiet tension that settled into every room, every conversation. Even when we watched TV together or sat at the dinner table, the silence between us spoke louder than words ever could. My mom and Michael, sitting there, lost in their own bubble, and me, still standing on the outside, not sure where I belonged. It was on the third day of my return that Michael suggested we go on a hike. He had been talking about it the day before, suggesting that it might be a good way to relax and clear our heads. And despite the tension that had built up between us, I agreed. There was something about getting out of the house, being outside, away from the coldness of the living room, that made me feel like I could breathe again. It was a beautiful day, the kind of early autumn afternoon when the air is crisp but not too cold. The mountains were quiet, the trees turning shades of amber and gold, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt a sense of peace. The hike was light, just a short trail up the nearby hills, but it was the first time I had been able to really talk to Michael without all the pressure that came with being at home. He talked about his past, something I hadn't heard much about before. He told me about his previous marriage, how things had ended badly, how he had been hurt, and how difficult it had been for him to start over. Listening to him speak so openly was a shock. I had always seen Michael as this calm, unruffled man who was trying too hard to be part of our family. But now, I was hearing the cracks in his perfect exterior. He wasn't the man I had imagined. He was a person with his own struggles, his own disappointments, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of empathy for him. For a moment, it felt like we were on the same wavelength. It wasn't just about me trying to figure out my place in this family. It was about us both, two people who were trying to figure out how to move on from the past. Michael wasn't the man I had resented, but a person who was also struggling with what had happened in his life. His vulnerability caught me off guard, and I realized that there was so much more to him than I had given him credit for. As we walked along the trail, I found myself opening up as well. I told him about the loneliness I had felt since my parents' divorce, how it had affected my relationships and my ability to trust. I didn't expect to tell him any of this, but somehow, in the quiet of the mountains, with the crisp air filling my lungs, the words just came out. There was a brief silence between us, and then, almost instinctively, Michael reached for my backpack and adjusted the straps for me. His fingers brushed against mine, and for a split second, I felt a jolt of electricity. The touch was accidental, but it didn't feel like it. It felt different. His hand lingered on mine for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. And in that moment, I realized something that made my heart race. There was more to this dynamic than just politeness. I was feeling something for him that I hadn't expected. I quickly pulled my hand away, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. I couldn't let myself go down this path. Michael was married to my mother. He was my stepfather. This wasn't supposed to be happening, and yet, I couldn't ignore the way my heart skipped a beat every time he spoke to me or looked at me. We didn't say anything after that moment. We continued the hike in silence, but the quiet between us was different now. There was a tension that wasn't there before, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, we were both aware of something we weren't ready to confront. Later, as we made our way back down the mountain, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between us. I didn't know what it was or where it would lead, but I knew it was something I couldn't ignore anymore. My feelings for Michael had gone beyond just the polite indifference I had felt toward him before, and now, I had no idea how to handle what was happening inside me. The days following the hike were a blur of strange emotions. The tension between Michael and me had become almost unbearable. We spoke less and less, and when we did, it felt like the words didn't come naturally anymore. I had been avoiding him as much as I could, trying to push away the feelings that were starting to rise inside of me. I couldn't stop thinking about the way his hand had brushed against mine, the way my heart had skipped when our fingers met. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew I couldn't ignore it, and that terrified me. The house felt even more suffocating now. Every corner seemed to hold the echoes of old memories, of a family that once felt whole. It was as though I didn't belong here anymore, like I was a ghost in my own home. My mother, ever the optimist, was still recovering, and though she tried to include me in their routine, I could feel the wall that had been built between us over the years. Michael, on the other hand, continued to make an effort. His attempts to connect with me had not stopped, but the more he tried, the more distant I felt. It was as if we had crossed some invisible line, and now, I couldn't bring myself to pretend that everything was okay. But it wasn't just him. Part of me wanted to distance myself because I knew what I was beginning to feel for him. I knew it was wrong, but every time he spoke to me with that kindness, every time he offered me his attention, I couldn't help but feel something stir within me. And that was the problem. It wasn't until a few days later, when my mom had to go out for a checkup, that the tension finally broke. Michael and I were left alone in the house. It wasn't unusual, but this time it felt different. The silence was thicker, more palpable, as though we were both waiting for something to happen, but neither of us wanted to make the first move. We ended up sitting together in the kitchen, each of us trying to avoid the elephant in the room. The air felt heavy, thick with the unsaid words, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to act normal, to carry on as though nothing had changed, but I couldn't. Not when he was sitting right there, so close to me. Michael cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Sophie," he said softly, his voice gentle but serious. "We need to talk." I stiffened. The last thing I wanted was to talk to him about anything personal, but something in his voice made me pause, made me look at him. His eyes were different this time, not the casual, friendly gaze he always had, but something deeper, more intense. It made my stomach twist, and I found myself unable to look away. "What's going on, Michael?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "What do you want to talk about?" He hesitated for a moment, his hands fidgeting in his lap before he spoke again. "I've noticed you've been distant, and I get it. I'm not the person you expected to see when you came back. But I also know you've been carrying some weight from the past, and I want you to know that if you need to talk about anything, I'm here." I felt a lump form in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. His words were too kind, too sincere. I didn't know how to respond. The emotional wall I had built around myself was starting to crack, and I wasn't sure I was ready to deal with what was spilling out. "I don't know what you want from me," I said quietly, my voice trembling slightly. "I don't know how to be part of this family. I feel like I'm just passing through, like nothing has really changed." Michael's face softened, and he leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "I understand, Sophie. I really do. It's not easy for anyone. But I'm here, not just for Margaret, but for you too. I know it's hard to accept me as part of your life, but I want you to know that I care. I've always cared." I swallowed hard. His words struck a chord deep within me, more than I was willing to admit. But as much as I wanted to push him away, I couldn't. His sincerity, his kindness, the way he genuinely seemed to want to be a part of my life, it made me feel something I wasn't ready to feel. "I just don't know how to deal with this," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be okay with it." There was a long silence, and for a moment, I thought I had said too much. But then Michael did something I didn't expect. He reached across the table, placing his hand over mine. It was gentle, almost comforting, but it sent a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. His touch felt like a line had been crossed, like something had shifted between us in a way I wasn't prepared for. "I know this is hard," he said softly, his thumb brushing against my hand in a slow, reassuring motion. "But you don't have to go through this alone." I froze. My heart was racing, and my mind was spinning. I could feel the pull between us, the undeniable connection that had been growing since I arrived. I wanted to pull away, to tell him to stop, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just sat there, feeling his touch, trying to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, neither of us saying anything. But the moment was enough. It was a moment that would change everything. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, I couldn't. The feelings, the connection, it was all too real now. I should go, I said suddenly, standing up from the table, breaking the spell. Michael looked up at me, his expression unreadable, but I could see the conflict in his eyes, the same confusion and longing that I felt. We'll talk later, okay, he said quietly, watching me as I turned to leave. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I believed the words I'd just spoken. There was no later for me anymore, not after what had just happened. The following days were filled with an uncomfortable silence. I felt the weight of what had happened between Michael and me, pressing down on me every time I entered a room. It was impossible to ignore. I tried to convince myself that nothing had really changed, that I was overthinking everything, but the reality was undeniable. The way Michael looked at me, the way his touch lingered on mine, it had all shifted, and I was struggling to hold myself together. Mom didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary. She was still recovering, and I had made it my mission to focus on helping her get back on her feet. But every time I glanced at Michael, I could feel the tension building. It wasn't just the awkwardness, it was something deeper, something more dangerous that neither of us was willing to confront. The day after our conversation in the kitchen, Michael and I found ourselves alone again. It wasn't planned, it never was. But as I entered the living room to grab a book, I saw him standing by the window, looking out into the yard. His posture was tense, as if he was waiting for something, or perhaps avoiding something. He turned when he heard me enter. "Sophie," he said quietly, his voice softer than usual. "I think we need to talk." I froze, feeling my stomach tighten. I had been avoiding him, avoiding the conversation I knew was coming. But now, standing there in front of me, it seemed inevitable. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My throat felt dry, my heart racing. "What about?" I managed to ask, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. "I think you know what this is about," he said, stepping toward me. "We can't keep pretending like nothing's happening between us." I wanted to say something, anything, to stop this, to stop him from making it real. But I couldn't. I couldn't lie to myself anymore. My feelings for Michael had already gone beyond what I could explain. It was wrong, and I knew it, but it didn't make it any easier to deny. "I don't know what to do," I whispered, my eyes meeting his. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. This isn't right." Michael's expression softened, and he stepped closer to me, his presence overwhelming. "I know it's not right, but that doesn't change what's happening between us. You feel it too, Sophie." I closed my eyes, trying to block out the noise in my head. I wanted to walk away, to end this conversation before it went too far, but the pull between us was undeniable. Every word he spoke, every movement he made, was like a magnet drawing me closer. I couldn't stop myself. "I don't know what's happening," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But every time you're around, I can't think straight. I can't pretend this doesn't matter." Michael was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was low, almost a murmur. "I feel the same way, Sophie, and I'm not proud of it. But I can't ignore it anymore. We can't keep pretending like we don't have a connection." I felt my heart race as he reached out, his hand gently resting on my arm. The touch was light, but it sent a shock through me. I looked up at him, and for the first time, I saw the vulnerability in his eyes. He wasn't the perfect man I had once thought him to be. He was just as lost and confused as I was. "Michael, we can't do this," I said, my voice trembling. "I can't. I don't know how to deal with this." His grip tightened slightly, his hand sliding down my arm to take my hand. The gesture was intimate, almost too intimate, but I couldn't pull away. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel the tension building again, thicker than before. "We don't have to do anything," he said, his voice soft. "But we can't pretend like this isn't happening. We don't have to rush into anything, but we need to acknowledge what we're feeling. I'm not asking you for anything, Sophie. I'm just asking you to be honest with yourself." I wanted to argue, to tell him that this was wrong, that we couldn't continue down this path. But a part of me, a part one couldn't control, didn't want to fight him anymore. I was tired of pretending, tired of pushing these feelings aside. The truth was, I had been feeling it for a while now, the connection, the undeniable pull. And as much as I wanted to deny it, I couldn't anymore. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "I'm scared of what this means, of what it could do to everything." "I'm scared too," Michael said quietly, his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. "But maybe it's time we stopped being scared." His words hit me like a wave. I knew what he was asking. He wasn't just talking about this moment. He was talking about everything. About us, about what was happening between us. He was asking me to step forward, to take a leap of faith, even if it meant risking everything. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to run, to escape this situation before it went any further. But another part of me, the part that had been pushing these feelings away for so long, wanted to give in. I could feel my heart beating faster, my breath shallow as I looked at him. "I don't know if I'm ready," I whispered. Michael's gaze softened, and he stepped even closer, his face inches from mine. I could feel the heat of his body, the tension between us so thick it was almost suffocating. He didn't move closer, but I could feel the weight of his presence. "You don't have to be ready right now," he said gently. "But we can't keep pretending. We both know this is something we can't ignore. I just need you to trust me." And in that moment, I knew that I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't pretend. There was no going back from this. The days following our conversation in the kitchen were filled with a tense silence that neither Michael nor I could ignore. We both knew the unspoken truth between us, but neither of us knew how to navigate what had just begun to unfold. Every glance, every word seemed to hold weight, and yet, we continued to tiptoe around the real issue. Every moment spent in the same room was a reminder that things were no longer the same. The attraction, the connection, it was undeniable, but neither of us could bring ourselves to address it head on. It was late one afternoon when I found myself alone in the house with Michael once again. Mom had gone out for a quick errand, and the house felt even quieter than usual. I wasn't sure what it was about being alone with him that made everything feel so heavy. Perhaps it was the fact that we had crossed some invisible line, and now, the tension between us was unbearable. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through an old magazine that I wasn't really reading, when I heard his footsteps approaching. I didn't look up immediately. I could feel him standing just behind me, his presence so close that it made my skin tingle. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what he was thinking, what he wanted from me. "Sophie," he said, his voice quiet but firm, pulling me from my thoughts. I turned my head slightly, still not looking directly at him. "Yeah? I think we need to talk," he said, his voice carrying a tone of something more serious now, more urgent than before. There was no way I could avoid this any longer. The way he was standing, the way he spoke, he was ready to confront it. And I knew, deep down, so was I. I nodded, setting the magazine aside and shifting slightly so I could face him. His eyes were intense, filled with something I couldn't quite decipher, something that mirrored the confusion I had been feeling since that moment on the mountain. I wanted to look away, to pretend like it didn't matter, but I couldn't. I couldn't lie to myself anymore. He sat down next to me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. The air between us seemed to thicken, as if every breath we took carried the weight of what was coming. Neither of us spoke at first. The silence was deafening, and I could feel my pulse quicken as I waited for him to say something, anything. Finally, Michael broke the silence. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "But I can't keep pretending like this doesn't matter. What's happening between us, it's not something I can ignore. And I'm sure you feel it too." His words hit me like a slap in the face. I had known it for days, even weeks, but hearing him say it out loud made everything feel real in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was no longer something I could bury under the surface. It was right in front of us, unavoidable. "I don't know what to do, Michael," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I don't know what to feel anymore. This isn't just a normal situation. I'm your wife's daughter. This shouldn't even be happening." Michael exhaled slowly, his gaze softening as he looked at me. "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know this is wrong. I know it's complicated, but I can't help how I feel, and I don't think you can either. We can't keep pretending that we don't feel something for each other." I looked at him, my heart racing, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and desire. Everything about this situation screamed that it was wrong, that it could ruin everything. Yet, despite the moral conflict, despite the weight of what was happening, a part of me didn't want it to stop. The connection between us was too strong, too undeniable. "Michael, this could destroy everything," I said, my voice shaky. "You're married to my mother. This is so messed up." He took a deep breath and leaned closer to me, his presence overwhelming. "I know, Sophie, I know better than anyone how wrong this is, but it doesn't change the way I feel, and it doesn't change the fact that I can't stop thinking about you, about us." I could feel the tension rising, the pull between us so strong that it felt like something inside me was snapping. I wanted to push him away, to tell him to stop, to remind him of the boundaries we shouldn't cross. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself leaning closer, unable to resist the magnetic force between us. I didn't want to feel this way, but I couldn't deny it. The connection was there, and no matter how hard I tried to suppress it, it had already taken root. Before I knew it, His lips were on mine. It wasn't the passionate kiss I had imagined. It wasn't a desperate rush of emotions. It was slow, tentative, as if we were both testing the waters, unsure of what we were doing but unable to stop. My heart pounded in my chest as I responded, my hands trembling as they rested on his chest. I couldn't think straight. Every part of me screamed that this was wrong, that we were crossing a line that should never be crossed. But in that moment, all I could think about was him, his touch, the way he made me feel. We broke apart, both of us gasping for air, our faces inches apart. I felt like I was drowning in the intensity of what had just happened, and I had no idea what to do next. This was no longer just a confusing attraction. It was real, it was happening, and there was no turning back. "We can't keep doing this," I whispered, my voice hoarse with emotion. "We can't." But Michael didn't pull away. Instead, he took my hand, his grip tight, as if he was afraid I might disappear. "I know," he said softly, "but I can't stop, and neither can you." I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't know if we should stop, or if we should just give in to the undeniable pull between us. But one thing was clear, everything had changed. The days after the kiss felt like I was walking through a fog. Every step I took seemed to lead me further into confusion. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about what had happened between Michael and me. It was undeniable, the pull between us. The way he looked at me, the way he held me, everything about him drew me in. And yet, every part of me screamed that what we were doing was wrong. It wasn't just wrong for me, it was wrong for my mother. It was wrong for everything I had believed about family and loyalty. And yet, I couldn't escape it. Michael hadn't mentioned the kiss after that day, and neither had I. We acted as if nothing had changed, but everything had. The tension between us was unbearable. Every time he was near me, I felt that spark, that electric current running between us. The moment we had shared was constantly on my mind. And, despite my guilt, despite the nagging voice inside me that told me I should be stopping this, I couldn't push him away. It was the night after our silence had stretched on for days that Michael approached me again. It had been nearly a week since the kiss, and in that time, I had tried to distance myself from him. I focused on my mom's recovery, and I tried to pretend that nothing had changed. But the distance between us was becoming impossible to maintain. Michael came to me quietly, almost as if he was waiting for my permission to speak. "Sophie," he said softly, his voice low, "we can't keep pretending like this doesn't matter. What happened between us, it's not something we can just ignore. I can't ignore it, and I know you can't either." I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to push him away, tell him to stop, but I couldn't. I wanted this, even though I knew it was wrong, even though I knew how it would destroy everything if anyone found out. "I know," I whispered, "but this isn't just about us. It's about everything. About Mom. About the family." Michael's expression softened, and I saw the conflict in his eyes. "I get it, Sophie. I'm not trying to destroy your family, but I can't pretend that I don't feel something for you. And I think you feel it too." I couldn't deny it. The feelings I had for him had only grown stronger over the past week, and the more I tried to suppress them, the more they threatened to consume me. But the guilt was suffocating. I had never felt more torn in my life. "I don't know how to handle this," I said, my voice trembling. "Everything's just too complicated." "I know," Michael said, his voice soft but filled with determination. "But we can't just ignore it anymore. We've crossed a line, Sophie, and I can't go back. Neither can you." I wanted to say something, anything, to stop him, but I couldn't find the words. My heart was racing, my thoughts spinning out of control. The room seemed to close in on me, and I found myself leaning into him, my body betraying me. Michael's hands gently cupped my face, his thumb brushing over my cheek, and for a moment, I forgot everything. I forgot the guilt, the fear, the consequences. All I could focus on was him. "Sophie," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "I need you to be honest with me. Can you really walk away from this? Can you pretend it didn't happen? Or do we figure out what comes next?" I stared at him, my breath shallow. I wanted to run. I wanted to push him away, tell him this was wrong, tell him it could never happen again. But I couldn't. I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I couldn't ignore what was happening between us. "I don't know," I said, my voice breaking. "But I can't keep pretending I don't feel this. I can't keep pretending I don't want this." And in that moment, everything changed. The fear, the doubt, the hesitation, it all fell away. All that mattered was the undeniable connection between us. I couldn't stop it. I didn't want to stop it. Michael leaned in, his lips brushing mine once again. This time, there was no hesitation, no pulling away. There was only the heat, the intensity, the longing. We kissed, slowly at first, as if testing the waters, and then more urgently, the need to be close to each other overwhelming. The kiss wasn't just an act of desire, it was an act of surrender. We were both surrendering to something we couldn't control, something we knew was dangerous but couldn't stop. When we finally pulled away, we were both breathless, our faces flushed. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence was filled with the weight of our actions, the consequences of what had just happened. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know if we could go back to the way things were before, if there was any way to repair the damage we had just done. But for the first time in days, I felt a sense of clarity. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Michael and I were no longer just two people in a family. We were something more, something that neither of us could deny. But now, I had to face the consequences. The question was, could we handle them? Or had we already crossed a point of no return?